The prevailing analysis is obsolete. The media fixates on kinetic threats, reporting on new contracts for missile defense programs. This is a strategic misdirection. While the state prepares for a launch on warning scenario, its adversaries are not targeting its hardware. They are targeting its nervous system. The critical liability is not military overmatch. It is systemic fragility. The foundation is already compromised by internal political infighting and the risk of recession spreading through allied economies. An adversary understands this. The optimal vector of attack is not a hypersonic missile. It is absolute, weaponized silence. Analysts at RUSI and CSIS have mapped the true asymmetric threat, the severing of subsea data cables and the blinding of satellite constellations. This is the silent vector. It requires no armada, only precision sabotage. The objective is not to destroy military assets, but to induce a systemic solvency and confidence crisis by unplugging the multi-trillion-dollar digital economy from its physical infrastructure. This protocol transforms the global power into a blind leviathan, a state possessing overwhelming kinetic force but deprived of the data to wield it with precision. It is deaf and disoriented. Its only remaining protocol is reflexive escalation, using force not to project power, but to stave off total systemic collapse. The kinetic cost becomes a last resort to prevent a liquidity crisis. The motive is not territory, it is solvency. When a nation's internal balance sheet is in default, plagued by political infighting and economic fragility, the state itself faces a systemic confidence crisis. It can no longer project power, it can only manage liabilities. Analysts at CSIS have framed Russia's kinetic action not as a war of choice, but as a solvency event. A prolonged, unpopular conflict represents a terminal domestic liability. The state, unable to afford the escalating political and economic cost of a symmetric war, is forced to pivot. This forces a pivot to asymmetry. Adversaries no longer need to defeat the hegemon's military. They only need to trigger its internal collapse. The goal is to present the weakened state with a set of unacceptable outcomes, forcing it into a predictable escalation protocol. This blueprint is universal. It is the independence crisis reported when a DOJ probe into the Fed chair rattles global markets. It is Britain staring down recession from tariff shocks. The response is mathematical. As confidence collapses, kinetic spending accelerates. Securing new missile defense contracts is not a sign of strength. It's the system's last-ditch effort to prevent the entire ledger from being marked to zero. The calculus of modern warfare has inverted. According to analysts at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, the kinetic cost exchange is now terminally asymmetric. An adversary can neutralize a $5 million main battle tank using a $500 drone. This is not a balanced fight. It is an economic attrition vector. The math is irrefutable. This is the democratization of violence. The barrier to entry for projecting lethal force has collapsed. The industrial military complex, built on multi-billion-dollar platforms like advanced missile defense programs, is now exposed. Its business model requires expensive, long-cycle development, while its adversary's model is cheap, disposable, and adaptable. The response protocol is a liability trap. Escalating kinetic force to counter these low-cost threats drains liquidity from an already fragile system. While markets are rattled by internal solvency questions, such as probes into the Federal Reserve, the state is forced to burn capital on defense. The adversary's goal is not military victory. It is to trigger a systemic solvency crisis, forcing the hegemon to bankrupt itself in a launch-on-warning defense posture. The battlefield is no longer a physical location. It is a distributed network. While legacy media focuses on declared travel warnings for nations like South Africa, they miss the strategic signal. According to RUSI analysts, these are not advisories. They are designations. These regions are being designated as gray zones, proxy laboratories for a new vector of systemic warfare. The operational blueprint is mathematical. Adversaries observed these proxy zones to measure the exact inputs required to trigger a systemic cascade failure. While the DOJ investigation into the Federal Reserve Chairman erodes domestic confidence and rattles markets, hostile actors are running low-cost simulations abroad. They are not testing military tactics. They are calibrating the precise leverage needed to trigger a solvency crisis inside the United States. This isn't theory. It's a documented strategy. CSIS reports detail how economic warfare, perfected in these gray zones, is the primary asymmetric threat. The goal is not to defeat the U.S. militarily, but to force a confidence collapse. While allies like Britain are assessed for their vulnerability to recession from tariff pressure, the real weapon being forged is a repeatable protocol for economic decapitation. The inevitable result is a forced kinetic response. As internal liabilities mount, the state's only remaining tool is military escalation. The contracts for missile defense programs are not a sign of strength. They are a pre-programmed reaction to a systemic threat that cannot be stopped financially. This is the endgame. Trigger an economic crisis from a proxy zone, forcing the hegemon into a launch-on-warning protocol to prevent total internal collapse. The kinetic cost becomes the only way to avoid a solvency event. The launch-on-warning protocol is a relic of Cold War mathematics. It is a non-discretionary directive. If early warning systems detect an incoming strategic nuclear attack, a retaliatory strike must be launched before the incoming warheads can destroy command and control and our own launch capability. The logic is one of absolute deterrence. It is a systemic kill switch designed to guarantee a zero-sum outcome. This protocol, however, assumes the integrity of the warning signal. It was designed for an era of radar and satellites, not cyber warfare. As private contractors like Innodata are integrated into U.S. missile defense programs, the digital attack surface expands exponentially. The primary liability is no longer a surprise first strike, but a corruption of the data that validates that strike. This creates the fog of digital war, a core vulnerability CSIS reports have modeled. An adversary does not need to launch a missile. They only need to spoof a launch signature while simultaneously executing a cyber attack that blinds the verification systems. The commander in the bunker is now presented with a ghost. The screen shows 5 inbound ICBMs, but the radar feed is dead. The protocol clock is ticking. To not launch is to bet the nation's existence that it's a bluff. To launch is to initiate global thermonuclear war based on a potentially false signal. The adversary has not fired a shot, yet forces a kinetic escalation by weaponizing our own systemic fear. The internal liabilities are now quantifiable. A Department of Justice criminal probe targeting the Federal Reserve Chair is not a political event. It is a systemic stress test designed to measure the breaking point of market confidence. This internal division, broadcast globally, functions as an open invitation to adversaries. It signals that the core architecture of Western finance is compromised from within. Adversaries observing this dynamic have no incentive for kinetic engagement. The primary target is not military. It is solvency. According to analysts at CSIS, the protocol shifts from direct confrontation to triggering a systemic failure. The objective is to force an overreaction, a launch-on-warning response, not with missiles, but with emergency liquidity measures that further devalue the sovereign currency and accelerate the collapse. Within the next 12 months, expect a calibration shot, a targeted, multi-hour, attribution-impossible blackout of a Tier 4 financial data clearinghouse in the New York-New Jersey corridor. The event will be officially attributed to a cascading power grid failure or anomalous solar flare activity. The actual vector will be a dormant software exploit, activated to test the U.S. Treasury and Federal Reserve's emergency response time to a flash liquidity freeze. This is not an act of war, it is a solvency test.